The year is 1521. The walls of Belgrade shudder as Ottoman cannons roar against the stone. Smoke fills the sky, screams echo through the narrow streets, and the city's defenders fight a battle they already know they cannot win. But what came after the walls fell was far more terrifying than the battle itself. Because for the wives and families of the defeated warriors, their fate would not end with death or exile. It would be something much darker. What unfolded wasn't random cruelty, but a system so meticulously organized that it turned human lives into property, a machine of domination unlike anything Europe had ever seen before. And for the women taken that day, the nightmare was only just beginning. What many people don't realize is that the horrors following an Ottoman victory weren't the result of chaotic plunder or soldiers acting on impulse. They were part of a carefully designed system. The Ottomans had turned conquest into bureaucracy. Every captured man, woman and child was treated like state property, catalogued, divided and processed with chilling precision. At the heart of this system was a concept known as sabaya, women taken in war. This idea had deep roots in law and tradition, but under the Ottoman Empire it was applied with terrifying efficiency. The moment a city surrendered, specialized officers moved in. Their job wasn't to fight, but to sort people like merchandise. Men were separated from their families, children were dragged into different groups, and women, they faced a degrading evaluation that determined their entire future. This wasn't looting, this wasn't chaos. It was an empire-wide machine designed to strip away humanity and replace it with numbers, categories, and price tags. And for those women singled out in this process, the nightmare had only just begun. Once the women were separated from their families, the process became disturbingly methodical. Ottoman officials didn't see them as people. They saw them as inventory. Physicians were brought in to examine them as if they were livestock. Every detail mattered: their age, their health, their fertility, even the shape of their teeth. The youngest and most beautiful were marked as high value, destined for the harems of powerful men or to be sold in the grand markets of Constantinople. Older women weren't spared either. They were classified for back-breaking domestic labor or assigned to the most degrading tasks imaginable. Their worth wasn't measured by who they were, but by how much work could be extracted from them. The selection was carried out with the cold precision of a marketplace. Women were tagged, recorded and separated into groups, their identities stripped away in a single afternoon. What made this process even more horrifying was the lack of chaos. This wasn't savage looting or unrestrained violence. It was organized, efficient and deliberate, a machine of dehumanization working exactly as designed. But for the women marked as valuable, the nightmare was about to grow even darker, because their next destination was the slave markets, and the humiliation waiting there was beyond anything they had endured so far. Being selected was not the end of their ordeal. It was the beginning of a journey that felt like punishment in itself. Chained together in long lines, women were forced to march for miles under the scorching sun, with little food and almost no water. Those too weak to keep pace collapsed on the roadside, abandoned to die without a second thought. Others were crammed into carts like cargo, stacked and shackled in conditions so brutal that many never survived the trip. And yet, for those who did reach their destination, survival came with no relief. In Constantinople, Bursa and Ankara, vast slave markets awaited them, places designed to strip away the last shreds of dignity these women still held. The markets weren't chaotic back alleys, they were organized institutions, complete with official rules and regulations. In Constantinople, the great market in the Eminönü district displayed captured women like merchandise in an open bazaar. Potential buyers inspected them in public, checking their teeth, running hands across their arms and shoulders, and even testing their domestic skills before making an offer. Every moment was meant to humiliate. It wasn't just about being sold, it was about breaking their spirits so thoroughly that resistance seemed impossible. And yet, the most terrifying fate awaited those judged as the most beautiful, because for them, the markets were not the end, but the gateway to the gilded prisons of the Ottoman harems. For the youngest and most beautiful women, the slave markets were not the final stop. Instead, they were sent to a place that to outsiders seemed like a palace of luxury, the harems. Later stories and art painted the harem as a world of silk cushions, golden lamps, and sensual mystery. But the reality was far from romantic. These weren't paradises of pleasure. they were gilded prisons. Inside the walls of the imperial harem at Topkapi Palace, thousands of women lived in constant fear. Every day was a struggle for survival, where rivalry and suspicion poisoned even the smallest friendships. Each woman knew that her fate depended entirely on the unpredictable whims of the Sultan and his court. But survival required more than obedience. It demanded the total erasure of the past. Women were forced to abandon their languages, their religions, and even their names. They were given new Turkish identities and compelled to adopt Ottoman customs. Those who hesitated faced harsh punishments, beatings, isolation, and sometimes far worse. The harem wasn't about pleasure alone. It was about power. Each woman was a living symbol of conquest, proof that the Sultan's reach extended not only over nations but over the most intimate aspects of his captives' lives. And for those who dared to resist, the punishments waiting for them revealed just how far this system was willing to go to crush the human spirit. For the women who refused to submit, the Ottomans had methods designed not just to punish the body, but to shatter the mind. Those who resisted conversion or clung to their identities were locked in dark, airless cells for days at a time. Food and water were withheld until starvation forced obedience. Some were beaten until they collapsed, their bruised bodies left as warnings to others. The system wasn't designed to kill, it was designed to break, to strip away hope until even the strongest women accepted that escape was impossible. Forced conversion was another weapon. Captured Christians were dragged through ceremonies that felt less like religion and more like humiliation. Once declared Muslim, they could never return to their families or faith, even if they managed to escape. Legally, they now belonged entirely to the empire. The psychological toll was devastating. Some women slipped into madness, their minds unable to bear the endless pressure. Others saw death as the only way out, choosing to end their own lives rather than live another day in captivity. And yet, for those who endured, the nightmare didn't stop with them, because the Ottomans had found a way to ensure this cycle of suffering continued into the next generation. For many women, captivity didn't end with their own suffering. The system ensured that their children too would never know freedom. Any child born to a slave woman automatically became the property of her master. From the very first breath, their fate was sealed, not as sons or daughters, but as future servants. This cruel rule created a permanent class of human beings who could be bought, sold, or gifted like objects. Mothers were forced to raise children they knew they could never truly call their own. At any moment, a boy or girl might be torn from them, sold to another household, or handed over as a political gift. The bond between parent and child was deliberately broken, turning motherhood itself into a tool of control. For the empire, this practice had a chilling logic. It kept the cycle of slavery alive. For the women, it was a wound that never healed. They lived with the unbearable knowledge that their own bloodline had been absorbed into a system designed to erase every trace of who they once were. And this wasn't chaos or coincidence. It was all recorded, tracked, and managed with bureaucratic precision, a level of organization that made the suffering even harder to comprehend. Because behind every act of cruelty stood a ledger, a scribe, and an empire determined to turn human lives into statistics. What made the Ottoman system even more chilling was not just its brutality, but its efficiency. Every captive woman was treated like an entry in a ledger, catalogued, registered, and reduced to numbers on a page. Imperial scribes recorded everything: her age, her place of origin, her physical health, even the specific skills she might provide. Each detail determined her value in the empire's human marketplace. With this system, no woman was anonymous, but none were recognized as human either. They were inventory. For women of noble blood or those married to commanders who had resisted fiercely, the humiliation was even greater. They were often forced into the harems of the very men who had defeated their husbands. It wasn't just enslavement, it was psychological warfare, designed to break the spirit of entire communities by showing that even their most honored women could be reduced to property. This wasn't chaos, and it wasn't random cruelty. It was an empire proving its dominance through paperwork, showing that even the deepest aspects of life, marriage, family, and identity, could be rewritten by the Sultan's decree. And the consequences of this system didn't end at the palatons. See Gates. They rippled outward, shaping populations, cultures, and histories for centuries to come. The legacy of this system stretched far beyond the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, it reshaped the populations of the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. Entire communities lost generations of women, leaving permanent scars on their cultures and identities. Villages were left without daughters, families without mothers, and nations without balance. And the Ottomans didn't just influence their own territories. The efficiency of their slave system became a model for others. Legal precedents, bureaucratic methods, and market structures spread across the Muslim world, keeping the cycle alive in distant lands long after battles ended. Yet for centuries, historians downplayed this chapter of history. Many preferred to romanticize the empire, focusing on its military victories, monumental architecture, or administrative genius. The stories of the women who suffered were minimized, buried in archives, or twisted into exotic fantasies about harems. Only in recent decades has the truth begun to surface. With access to Ottoman records and shifting perspectives, scholars have started to piece together the reality, a machine of dehumanization so vast and efficient that it changed the very demographics of half a continent. And what makes this history most disturbing is not only what was done, but how it was done. Civilization and barbarism existed side by side. Palaces of learning, art, and architecture were built by an empire that, at the same time, was reducing thousands of women to statistics in a ledger. The voices of these women were silenced in their time, their names erased, their stories untold, but their suffering still echoes, a reminder that progress is never guaranteed and that the systems built by power can just as easily destroy as they can create. And that is why remembering them matters, not as footnotes in an empire's history, but as a warning to us today. Whenever humans are treated as property, the darkest parts of our nature are never far behind. The fall of Belgrade in 1521 was only the beginning of a system that would haunt entire generations. The Ottoman Empire perfected a machine of conquest that didn't just seize land, it consumed people. Women were stripped of their names, their faith, their families, and even their children, until nothing remained but the mark of ownership stamped upon them. What makes this history so unsettling is not only the cruelty itself, but the order behind it. This wasn't chaos, it wasn't soldiers acting without control, it was bureaucracy, policy, and administration, the cold machinery of a state that transformed human lives into inventory. And yet, even in the face of such overwhelming oppression, traces of resistance survived. Secret escapes, whispered prayers, and desperate acts of defiance proved that no system, however brutal, could fully extinguish the human spirit. Today, their names are gone, erased from records and forgotten in chronicles, but their suffering carries a warning that echoes across centuries. When power treats human beings as property, civilization itself becomes complicit in barbarism. Remembering them is more than history, it's a reminder that dignity, freedom, and humanity can never be taken for granted, and that the moment we allow systems of power to strip people of their identity, we risk repeating the darkest chapters of our past